Okay, I think we will kick off now. So welcome everyone to the launch of auDA's third annual Digital Lives of Australians report. I'm Rebecca Papillo, auDA's Media and Communications Manager. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the lands on which I'm coming to you from today, the original home of the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present. I also acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's commitment to innovation and technology over many millennia, a commitment we at auDA deeply share and respect. So just before I do move on, just letting everyone know that we are recording this session. So our 2023 Digital Lives report is a continuation of our Digital Lives of Australians research, which began in 2021. This year's report theme is Readiness for Emerging Technologies. It explores attitudes towards and take-up of key emerging technology by Australian consumers and small businesses. Today, we'll take you through a few key findings from our research. auDA's Chief Communications Officer, Sophie Mitchell, will shortly introduce the report before handing over to Keith McGowan, Director of SEC Newgate Research, auDA's research partner. Keith will take us through the findings. We'll then move on to a panel discussion, and we're thrilled to be joined today by experts from Australia's digital community, Chandni Gupta from the Consumer Policy Research Centre, and Johanna Weaver from the Australian National University's Tech Policy Design Centre. After that discussion, we've allocated time for questions from the audience. So please do take the opportunity to ask those via the Zoom Q&A tab as we go along. The report will be made available in the Zoom chat. So please see that link there. And with that, I'll hand over to Sophie to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rebecca, and welcome everyone. We're delighted today to officially launch auDA's 2023 Digital Lives of Australians Readiness for Emerging Technology report. Now in its third year, our Digital Lives of Australians research study is an in-depth exploration of the online experiences of Australians over time. Our purpose in carrying out this research is to generate discussion amongst policymakers, the technology, business and educational sectors, and to initiate action that supports improvements to the economic and social outcomes for Australians through the internet. As we all know, the internet isn't static, far from it. Over the last 12 months, internet-enabled applications have evolved at pace. Artificial intelligence has entered the mainstream, blockchain continues to build momentum, and the entertainment industry is using AI and VR to create experiences, including virtual concerts and bringing back long-gone musicians back to life. And big business, of course, continues to automate their operations with sophisticated robotics, amongst many other applications. So that is why it's important to deepen our understanding of Australians' knowledge, perceptions, and comfort in using emerging technologies. And that is why our 2023 Digital Lives of Australians research focuses on 4 key emerging technologies: artificial intelligence, or AI, robotics, virtual and augmented reality, and blockchain. The survey measures Australian consumer and small businesses' knowledge of these 4 emerging technologies, and it looks at how useful they consider the technologies, their current level of competence, what they consider to be the most significant benefits, and importantly, the barriers that are keeping them from adopting these technologies. And while we will delve deeper into the report in a moment, just in summary, I'll highlight some of the key research findings, and they are that take-up of emerging technologies by Australian consumers and small businesses is limited. Greater education to help Australians better understand the technologies may support awareness of associated benefits. Data security, privacy, cost and availability are key barriers for consumers and small businesses in using emerging tech. So improving the affordability and fit-for-purpose regulation, we consider will open doors for more Australians to access these emerging technologies and also likely support greater take-up. And so this will be particularly important for small business to ensure they don't get left behind. The report also found that a deeper grasp of emerging technologies, those with a deeper understanding are more likely to recognise a need for regulatory safeguards. But to discuss the report in more detail, I'm really pleased to introduce to you all now Keith McGowan, Director at SEC Newgate Research. Keith has over 15 years of experience as a social research practitioner, both here in Australia and over in the United Kingdom. And his team has conducted this research for 3 years now, and we are thrilled to present the results today. So for those of you listening online, if you have any questions that pop up during the course of this presentation, please put them in the Zoom Q&A tab, and we will of course ask them of Keith and our panellists later in the session. But for now, Keith, thank you for joining us. I'm going to hand over to you to present the results of our 2023 research. Thanks, Keith.
Thank you, Sophie. Thanks for that introduction, and thank you everyone for joining the webinar this morning. Me personally and SEC Newgate, very proud to have worked with auDA since 2021 on the Digital Lives of Australian Research Program. It's a fascinating topic, not that all the work we do isn't fascinating, but it's right at the forefront and one we really enjoy working on. Sophie's given a great overview there of some of the research findings. I hope that's whet your appetite to go through some of the research results in a bit more detail. So to start with, what I'll do is just talk quickly to give you a sense of how the research was undertaken. So we just go forward and one page. This year we undertook an online survey in July, so quite recently, with a very robust sample of 1,500 consumers and a touch over 400 small business owners or managers from all around Australia. It was a self-complete online survey that took participants around 12 minutes on average to complete and comprised mainly pre-programmed questions. The sample design and the data treatment mean it is broadly representative of the wider population. So going forward, as has been prefaced, this year we focused on 4 emerging technologies: artificial intelligence or AI, virtual and augmented reality, blockchain, and robotics. We provided a brief description of each of these technologies to survey participants, and we asked about the technologies overall, as well as in relation to a range of specific activities that use these technologies, and those activities were tailored to be relevant to the consumer and small business participants. So to start with, participants were asked to rate how much they know about each technology. And we did that before providing them with the detailed description. And overall, what we found is that knowledge is limited, but some groups report stronger knowledge. Indeed, across all 4 technologies, the cohorts who you see listed on screen there rated their knowledge as higher. No real surprises there, but it does highlight that there is variable knowledge within the population. So younger consumers, those in the workforce, those from higher income households, those who are more confident using the internet generally, and male consumers reported higher knowledge than their female counterparts. As we go forward, we'll show you the numbers for the knowledge measure and reported usage as well. So we've ordered them from highest to lowest in terms of the 4 technologies. And what you can see is that a majority of consumers firstly know at least a little bit about AI, robotics, and virtual and augmented reality. Yet the number that really stands out to us is the first numbers on the left there. Only 5 or 6% of consumers feel they know enough about these technologies to be able to explain them to others. And when we look down at blockchain at the bottom there, it's less well known. Indeed, only just over a quarter, if we add up those first 2 segments, knowing at least a little bit about blockchain, and the remaining 73% knowing not much or nothing at all about it. Reported usage shows a similar pattern to awareness. Certainly the ordering is the same, with AI the most widely used and blockchain the least widely used. On the next page, we've got the equivalent figures for small businesses. And While knowledge is a little bit higher and with the same pattern, AI being the most well-known and widely used and blockchain the least, the numbers in an absolute sense are still low, with sort of 10 to 12 or 13% feeling they have that level of detailed knowledge about the technologies. So why is, next page. We also asked about awareness and knowledge of AI platforms specifically. And this was interesting to us too. It feels that barely a day has gone by this year without some mention of AI in the news or posts on platforms like LinkedIn. So it was surprising to find that only 25% of consumers and 40% of small businesses were able to name a single AI platform without prompting. We showed participants a list of AI platforms, around 20 platforms in total, by no means a comprehensive list, but certainly a long list. And we saw that awareness jumped to 79% of consumers and 87% of small businesses recognizing some of these platforms. Not surprisingly, ChatGPT was the most mentioned platform in those unprompted mentions, but amazingly, even when prompted, only a third of consumers and just under half of small businesses selected ChatGPT from that prompted list to say they were aware of it. Why is knowledge important? Well, our analysis shows that those with greater knowledge are far more likely to recognize the potential of these technologies to lead to positive outcomes. As these charts show, when we compare those with higher knowledge with those that have lower knowledge of the technologies, we see that those with higher knowledge are much more likely to agree that the technologies will deliver positive economic and social outcomes. Those with higher knowledge also are more likely to recognize positive impacts in terms of things like freeing up people's time and fostering digital inclusion. And that's true across all four of the technologies. Conversely, those with lower knowledge tended only to agree in volume with some of the potential downsides of the emerging technologies. So if we jump to the next page, we'll see for virtual and augmented reality, the highest agreement level among those with lower knowledge was that the idea that virtual and augmented reality might diminish people's ability to communicate and interact with others in real life. Where there was most consensus, regardless of knowledge, was that people would feel more comfortable if there were stronger regulatory safeguards around the technologies. And again, that was true for all four technologies. But again, we see that those with higher knowledge were more likely to agree with this statement, suggesting that given their greater knowledge, they have more insight into the potential risks that are associated with these technologies. So to measure readiness for these technologies, we presented survey participants with a list of 15 specific activities linked to tasks or things that people might do in their everyday lives. And we asked people to select the activities that they thought would be useful to them in either their personal life or their work life. Interestingly, only a small proportion really felt that any of the individual activities would be useful in either of those two contexts. And indeed, many consumers felt that none of these activities would be useful. You see 36% selecting none within their personal life, and nearly half of working Australians, 48%, feeling none of those activities would be useful. This is likely due to limited knowledge about the underlying technologies, as we've seen, and perhaps also limited exposure to these activities today. The one activity that stood out as being seen as most useful in personal lives was the use of robotic devices for everyday chores, things like robot vacuum cleaners, 39%. These are readily available today, and it's easy to comprehend how they work. Some of the other activities that you can see here that had relatively higher perceived usefulness also exist already or are currently being trialed. So it's likely people have had more exposure to these activities. On the next page, for small business, we see a majority of small businesses identified at least one activity that they thought may be useful to their business, and we've got a lower proportion with only 27% selecting none. However, again, no single activity stood out as having widespread usefulness among all small businesses. The highest was AI chatbots, which was considered useful by 22% of small business participants. And you can see from the cluster of pink and purple bars at the top of the chart that activities underpinned by AI and by virtual and augmented reality seem to offer the greatest value to small businesses. We also asked participants to rate their current level of ability to perform these activities to give us that measure of competence. And when we overlay competence with perceived usefulness, we see some groupings of activities emerge. Starting at the bottom of the pyramid, what we've called established activities includes apps with built-in AI algorithms to provide personalized content. So such things you'd see in streaming platforms or social media platforms, and those robotic devices for everyday chores had the highest usefulness and competence. Both of these have been available for some time, and neither really requires a great level of skill, so can easily be adopted at a mainstream level. In the middle, the group of growing activities are anchored in common day-to-day experiences, things like planning and organizing, transport, travel, and deliveries, and therefore may have a relatively low learning curve. Current ability to do these activities is most likely restricted by limited opportunity to do them at present. And at the top are niche activities, which are generally more complex, requiring a higher degree of skill and knowledge. Some are one-off activities, such as registering a blockchain domain name. Some may be only relevant to a small group of consumers, such as using AI to help with studies. And some are still very new with limited availability at present, things like buying goods or services in the metaverse. Looking at the same thing for small businesses, we see there were no activities that we deem as established in the same way, but there's a big group of activities there that show potential to grow. And these really link to fundamental day-to-day business functions, things such as customer service delivery, production and assembly, marketing, and communications. So what will prompt people to take up these activities and embrace these new technologies? We explored the benefits associated with each activity as well as potential concerns. And the key benefits and concerns are summarized on the table here. Starting with consumers, we see some patterns emerge. Firstly, efficiency, so saving time or effort, is a primary benefit associated with activities across all four technologies. It comes through particularly strongly for activities such as using AI to test and refine programming code, virtual personal assistants that are powered by AI, and drone deliveries. Recreation was seen as a key benefit for some activities, notably creating images or music using generative AI, participating in games or events in the metaverse using augmented reality. These are new forms of fun and entertainment. Other key benefits associated with these technologies include organization, convenience, learning, relaxation, and security or peace of mind, which is especially linked to blockchain. As the table shows, there are also some common concerns, most notably worry about privacy and data security when using these technologies. And that's really consistent with online activities more broadly. A key concern with AI tools for content generation and task automation relates to the quality and accuracy of outputs. And there are some functional barriers or concerns in terms of the cost of the tools or devices and the ability to be able to access them. And looking at small businesses, they recognize similar potential benefits, particularly efficiency and convenience. They also see improved productivity as a potential benefit and financial benefits in terms of cost savings by automating repetitive tasks or labor-intensive business functions. Inspiration is a benefit recognized by small business in relation to the use of generative AI for creating marketing content. And we know from previous years of the research that small business most values the internet for the ability to connect with potential customers and to promote their business. Virtual and augmented reality provides a new way of connecting and for example, showcasing products to potential buyers using virtual reality and interacting with clients or colleagues within the metaverse. To finish, I'll come back to the issue of regulation of these emerging technologies. And as I'm sure many of us are aware, and there's things going on today, the Australian government and indeed governments overseas are working currently to establish and adapt official regulations, and that's great. What the research finds is that there are also high expectations that organizations that choose to use AI in their operations will employ a range of self-regulation controls. As the numbers on screen show, a strong majority of both consumers and small businesses feel it is important that organizations using AI have these types of controls in place, having appropriate privacy and security measures to protect personal data, measures to ensure ethical use of AI, and so forth, and including disclosure to customers and other stakeholders about how and when AI is being used by the business. So hopefully that's given you a bit more of a flavour of the research findings. I look forward to questions in the upcoming discussion. And now I'll pass back to Sophie.
Thanks very much, Keith. That was a great overview. And just as a reminder, there is a link to the report in the Q&A tab. So if you haven't yet checked it out, you're able to click on that and read through the report in your own time. So with those findings now fresh in our minds, I'd now like to introduce our panel, or the remainder of our panelists. We have Chandni Gupta, who is the Deputy CEO and Digital Policy Director at the Consumer Policy Research Centre. Hi, Chandni. And we also have with us Johanna Weaver, who's the Director at ANU's Tech Policy Design Centre. Thanks for joining us, Johanna. So Chandni and Johanna bring with them, for those of you who don't know them already, they bring a wealth of tech policy expertise, so we're thrilled to have them with us today. Chandni's work at the Consumer Policy Research Centre includes research on protecting consumers in the digital world, and Johanna and the Tech Policy Design Centre's work focuses on maturing the tech governance ecosystem in collaboration with industry, government, civil society and academia, in order to shape technology for the long-term benefit of humanity. We can't all say that every day. Chandni and Johanna join us now to dive deeper into these research findings along with Keith and to explore what they mean in practice. So I'm going to start just with a question for Chandni. Chandni, from the research, we know many Australians don't know much about emerging tech and have mixed feelings about it. Why should we help Australians embrace these technologies?
Yeah, so of course it's really important that we go down the step of ensuring that there is space for all Australians to enjoy the benefits of emerging tech. But before we do that, it's really, before we embrace, we'll need to enhance the protections. We've got a real opportunity now, as all of these emerging techs are in their very newbie form, to really set the guardrails in place so consumers can be really confident that they're using systems that have been designed with them in mind. One of the other issues is that we can't challenge what we don't know, and that goes for regulators and consumers as well. So when you see, for example, AI, which is used in so much now, especially automated decision making, so much in our online lives, but we have very little visibility of when it's used, how it's used, and what the impact is. And I think more of that coming through. So when you see accessibility and explainability are key parts of ensuring uptake, what we really also need to see is transparency from businesses when they are actually rolling this out. And we've been thinking about this as part of disclosures as well. What does that look like for consumers so that can, and for regulators? And any kind of disclosure can also mean that it sets up a precondition for really good consumer outcomes, because it means you've got regulators, researchers, consumers really understanding how tech is being applied and being applied to them, and then empower them to also question its application. And if there's any doubt and how it's being used, having the tools and mechanisms to actually reach out and ask for those questions, and then to have redress for when things go wrong. I think there's a whole loop there that we need to now think about. How do we create that really great framework that supports consumers in confidently engaging with the emerging tech.
Yeah, thanks, Chan. It's certainly a really important issue for us all to consider as we move down this path. On that point, I might just throw over to Johanna. Johanna, on the issue of regulation, the report certainly emphasises the importance of balancing innovation with regulation. How can policymakers strike the right balance, and what principles should guide their efforts in this context?
So look, this is a question that is kind of at the core of most of the conversations around regulation of technology. And I actually think even the way we frame the question sets us up for failure. So when we say it's about a balance between innovation and innovation and getting the right settings in place to provide privacy, security, etc., it implies that to have one, you need to have less of the other. And I actually think you can have innovation and all of the consumer protections and these things that are important for us to achieve the social and economic outcomes without being mutually exclusive. And that's about good regulatory design. So if we are designing regulations well, we will be doing both, not choosing one or the other. So we're not choosing between consumer protection or innovation. Actually, you really can't, in my view, and very soon won't be able to be considered innovative if you don't build into your product privacy, security, and consumer protections more broadly. So this is about actually, and very similar to what Chandra was saying, is about saying we need to actually flip the way we're thinking about innovation and recognize that innovation without those things is incomplete. So, I think that's not too much of a mind shift, and really also then comes back to consumers being able to demand this. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting and points to this tension in the report is one of the last slides that Keith showed is saying that 80% of people want artificial intelligence, rules around privacy protections, security, data protection when companies are building artificial intelligence. But when you go to an earlier part of the report where they're asking for consumers to identify some of their key concerns, they're putting concerns about privacy at sort of 13% of people are choosing that as a concern, and efficiency sitting at sort of 62%. Now, there's an inherent contradiction there in saying, in my view, it's not efficient unless it is also protecting privacy. So I think a lot of this and so much of the conversation around technology isn't actually about technology, right? It's about our expectations as consumers and as businesses and as a society to say, actually, efficiency without privacy doesn't work. And that's about empowering people to say we have agency to shape this technology. The technologies that a lot of people, and also highlighted in the report, don't have a lot of understanding about these technologies. But these technologies are built by humans, and we can build them differently. And I really commend auDA and Sec Newgate for this report, because it's one of the few, I don't know of any other report that is going into this detail about Australians' perceptions and Australia's views on these technologies. So it's a really important contribution and will help policymakers to be able to have those more tailored interventions.
Thanks so much, Johanna. We're really thrilled to have brought the report to life with Sec Newgate. And thank you also for your point. I love the point you make that they shouldn't, innovation and consumer safeguards shouldn't be mutually exclusive. Just to further that sort of line of thinking a little bit more, Chandni, I wonder if you wanted to comment, are there any sort of global best practices that Australia can learn from that you've been, looking at and that we should air today in this discussion?
So certainly one of the things that really comes through, and Johanna's touched on this, is that it's the humans creating the tech. And so we do need to think from a human side. And therefore, it's not really piecemeal approach to regulation or looking at, how do we regulate ChatGPT because there will be something else. What we really need to be thinking about is what do economy-wide reforms look like? And overseas, what we're seeing is regulators using laws that we currently don't have in place to actually hold tech accountable. And so that's things like an unfair trading prohibition, so a law against unfair business practices. And it's great that the government's actually currently consulting on it. And if it goes through, it will be definitely a consumer reform of our generation, but it needs to then hold businesses accountable for how they are applying tech and to consumers. And then there's, of course, our privacy protections. We've seen overseas the privacy protections are so much more stronger. And then over there, consumer advocates are pushing for further protections. And here we're in the space now. We again are at the cusp of hopefully new and improved privacy protections. Then there are a couple of other aspects that jump out for us. When we look at overseas, many of the jurisdictions have what's called a general safety provision. And so that's a provision that's upfront that products and services need to be safe. And what we ideally need is for this to happen now, because at the moment, any product, even physical product, doesn't need to actually be inherently safe unless there's specific mandatory standards linked to it. So you can put it on the shelf, and then later down the track, if it's recalled, then you go down the process. So it's a post-process of safety instead of a pre-process of safety. And so there's a real opportunity for us to learn from the jurisdictions overseas and build some of these things into our laws to really give that comfort to consumers that when they access something online or when they're using a digital product or service, they actually can confidently know that it's been designed with them in mind. It's designed with fairness, safety, and inclusivity all in mind. And that's the kind of things that I believe will really help drive the uptake. And your report so beautifully puts the fact that there is such a gap between what I think as policymakers who are in the tech policy space who are actually thinking about regulation, we think everyone might be thinking about it in that way. And it's certainly not the case. People are busy, people are doing other things. So while our LinkedIn feed is filled with ChatGPT, AI reg, what's happening, it's clearly not the feed of many, many Australians. And it shouldn't have to be. For them, it should be that when it comes into their lives, they can be confident that it is being implemented with their best interests in mind.
Thanks, Chandni, but that's why these discussions are so important. Johanna, I just wanted to throw to you quickly before we check in on questions from our audience. I just wanted to ask whether you had anything to add just in terms of things policymakers should be thinking about in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just also to add to Chandi's comment about other jurisdictions, I think we as Australians, we often look to other jurisdictions and we have this desire to be first as well. We're very competitive, but also at the same time very humble. And I think one of the things that Australia has done particularly well in terms of the regulation of artificial intelligence is we're one of the first countries that has come out with a really clear policy statement that says existing laws apply to artificial intelligence. So by applying the existing laws, it doesn't solve all of our problems. But, to Chandra's point about product safety and consumer protection, well, the ACCC, so first of all, the governments came out and made that very clear statement in the discussion paper on responsible artificial intelligence. But then in quite an extraordinary document, and if people are interested in this area, I really encourage that you read this document, which is DPReg, the Digital Platform Regulators Forum, put out a response to the government's paper, public response, which is, if you think about it, regulators responding publicly is a really interesting way to be communicating in and of itself, where they actually set out how they see these existing laws applying to these emerging technologies, including, very interestingly, product safety and consumer protection. Very clear statement that, misleading conduct, deceptive conduct, consumer protections, privacy, that these existing provisions apply. So definitely there are things we need to do to fix and to fill gaps, and Chandri's pointed out many of those. But I do also think we need to take a little bit of acknowledgement and congratulate the government for that clear statement, because there aren't very many governments that have made that so clear. In terms of what we should be doing, I think, and this comes back to the original question about balancing innovation with consumer protections, etc., is we also really need to be, when we talk about regulation, we often think about the things that we put in place to protect and restrict almost the activities of business and industry. I think a lot of this discussion around regulation also needs to look at how do we create the business certainty and the environment to enable businesses to come in and roll out these products, and obviously to innovate as well. But then, diffusion is kind of the hot topic of the day at the moment of those of us in the nerdy circles. So it's actually, how do you take the innovative product? It's fine to have, we've had electricity. Ford had electric cars nearly 80 years ago, right? But until we actually diffuse that into our population, that doesn't have the impact. So I think there's a lot to be said for the regulation to encourage, the positive regulation to encourage that diffusion, as well as what we need to do to put in place the protections from the harms. And so often the regulatory conversation focuses on the harms, not putting in place that framework for the business certainty that we need as well.
Yeah, thanks, Johanna. We certainly would like to see the benefits diffused, as you say, throughout the community. So it's a really important point. And I can see we're generating a lively discussion online there as well. So I might just now throw back to Rebecca, who was with us earlier. And Rebecca's going to just take us through some of those questions from the audience and share them with our panel for your insights. So thanks, Beck. I'll throw back to you.
Fabulous, thank you. So I might lead with one on legislation, as that's a lot of what we've been talking about recently. So Doc Sheldon asks, would it be fair to say that any proposed legislation being discussed would hold transparency as its key aspect? Chandni or Johanna, either of you that want to jump in first?
It's definitely one of the many aspects that I think you would need to consider. I think one thing that really came across in the report and stood out to me was when it's 98% of people rely on the internet and rely on the digital economy overall. And it's starting to show that it's no longer being online and consuming online products is no longer a luxury. It's an essential service. So we'll now need to start thinking about the tech that comes and builds into it to be as an essential service. And one of the things to think about it is then, well, what does an essential service usually offer us? And it offers us accessibility, affordability, safety, inclusiveness, transparency, and reliability and redress. And so they're all the principles I think that need to apply overall when we are looking into this step of, well, if tech is essential service, then how do we build in the same kind of safeguards so that it's used like any other essential service in our markets? And Joanna rightly pointed out, for example, with electricity, and that's now very much an essential service. It's not a luxury item. And I think we now need to start thinking about tech being that way as well. It isn't for the select few. It is very much for all of us to consume, but then there needs to be the same kind of mindset that we apply to some of those other services that we consider essential.
Fantastic. Johanna, did you want to add?
Just very briefly, I think transparency is really, really important, but equally important are things like the ability to review decisions, the ability to have review, and also oversight of decision makers. Now, exactly as Chandri said, these are all fundamental things that we have embedded in our public policy for other positions of power and oversight. And yet we don't necessarily have that in place for the use of many of these emerging technologies. So, it's a case of we've embedded the technology in our lives before we've embedded the considerations of it in our public policy and legal systems. And so that oversight, appeal, and transparency enables all of those things. But it's really those two things for me are really key to any successful future policy.
Fantastic, thank you. We've got one now for Keith. So this is from an anonymous attendee asks, given awareness, usage, and perceived usefulness of the emerging technologies is low, do you think people want to be more present online and use these technologies? Some of the comments in the report seem to highlight people are feeling quite concerned. So do you think people are fearful of being left behind, or are they just feeling overwhelmed by this concern?
Yeah, I think there's a real tension there. It's a theme we've heard in previous years as well, where that fear of being left behind is real, and I'd say probably more pronounced among the small business sample than our consumer sample. Where there's a sense that that they have to learn to how to embrace some of these technologies and internet-enabled technologies, including the ones we've looked at this year. And when we look at this year's data from the consumer perspective, there's pretty strong recognition of some of the benefits and the things that would be driving people to want to adopt them. The efficiency and some of those practical benefits, but also we see recreation coming through and sort of new ways for people to switch off, relax, have fun, and that sort of thing. So I think there will be appeal that people want to pursue them for those sorts of reasons as well. We've certainly heard in the past some consumers feeling, particularly those that work in jobs where they're online for most of their working day, needing to switch off from time to time. But I think that's a tension that people will manage and embrace those new technologies where they offer real benefits and where they've got the reassurance that doing so it can be done safely, and they'll fit that in, I think. So I think part of what will drive take up, it's almost not so much about learning how to use these technologies and do some of these things as having the ability and for some of these activities to start becoming normalized. I think about things like virtual events within a metaverse setting. And there's been limited opportunities for people to do those sorts of things to date, but as more events start to be arranged and they see more of their friends or peers doing them, then I think that will lead to wider uptake as well.
Fantastic, thank you. So I have another question here about access and cost, which are two of the key barriers that are limiting take-up of these technologies. So Chandni and Johanna, I'll throw to you on this one. What are some of the ways we can think about removing those barriers of cost and access for small businesses and consumers in Australia, particularly as we think about this digital divide that's potentially emerging between bigger business that are already taking up a lot of these technologies and smaller businesses that don't have all that much knowledge or drive to, at this point, start implementing them in their operations?
Yeah, so I think the accessibility and cost is a really important factor. But I think before we even get to accessibility of cost, what this report is highlighting is people don't actually, particularly the small business groups that were surveyed, are not necessarily seeing the benefit of these technologies. So there's there's actually a utility question that comes before the accessibility and cost point, which is the new finding from this report, because we've always thought it was accessibility and cost, but actually there's a utility question. And, you know, to Keith's point there about the way that we're using technology, I also think what's useful about this report is it allows us to start having a much more informed conversation about, do we actually want to be using this technology? There is a little bit of an assumption built into this report that this technology will inherently be good and make our lives better. And in many instances, it will increase productivity. It will mean that we don't have to be doing repetitive tasks. It will mean, you know, you can be focusing on the things that you love rather than doing the mundane invoicing, which has now become automated. But there is also some things that we don't, maybe we don't want to have concerts in the metaverse. Maybe we want to have concerts in real life, and maybe we want to have a bit of both. That's fine. But I think this sort of inevitability of technology evolving in a particular way is something that I would really push back a little bit and challenge, not from a productivity and from a small business perspective, but more broadly. And what excites me so much about this report is it actually gives us some solid findings to start having that conversation much more with some evidence around it. In terms of cost and affordability, accessibility and affordability, it's not surprising to me that big businesses are adopting this technology before small businesses. That's actually the story of innovation in many instances, right? And it's actually the scale that then makes it more affordable. And what I think the key will be is imposing the burden on the people that are making this technology to make this technology with privacy, with security, with protections built in, so that that onus is not on the small businesses, so that they can implement this technology and have this technology having the productivity inputs without the negative things. So that's the key hook, I think, in terms of availability and accessibility, but also utility.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Johanna there. The utility aspect also, I do wonder whether Australians have been a little bit scarred from the data breaches that have happened last year. With so many, like millions, have now been affected, or we know, I think everyone either has been affected or knows someone who's been affected multiple times. And there is going to be that feeling of, well, what does this mean for me? What does this new tech mean for me? And what is the risk? And then how do I then weigh up the benefits? And it increasingly gets us to start thinking about other ways that we can then start ensuring safeguards and really putting that accountability, as Joanna said, on those who are making the tech, to make it fair and safe and meaningful. One of the other ways other jurisdictions are looking into this is through best interest duties and embedding them into their data and privacy protections. And we're hoping that we'd be able to see something like this in Australia as well. When you're weighing up as a business the costs and benefits of what you are about to implement and deploy on your customers, you should be thinking about, well, what are the benefits? What are the risks? And then who are the customers that I'm leaving behind? Because then the digital divide is only going to grow if all we're doing is deploying, but we're not thinking about utility, accessibility, and cost. And what will end up happening is you've got those who are potentially in hardship or in experiencing vulnerability, where they're not seeking these AI tools. Those tools are just going to seep into their life, but not to make it better, potentially to make them worse off. And I think that's the balance that you actually need to be looking at. So yes, definitely before cost and accessibility, it's utility, and it's those data privacy settings, which the report so beautifully brings out, because it really highlights people aren't sure of utility, people have concerns on data and privacy, and when you marry that together, you're like, that's the gap that actually needs to be filled.
Fantastic, thank you. So we've got a couple of comments coming through on the Q&A as well, so I'll read a couple of those out. So the first one is mastery of doing a task manually. So something like making music or art or driving or traveling may be personally satisfying. So that could be a factor that impacts how interested people are in some of these emerging technologies, just that satisfaction that they get from doing it themselves. On a similar theme, while these emerging technologies may boast opening someone's world, they also arguably shrink our worlds. So there's less in-person interactions and attendance. So that's another one for us to keep in mind around some of those barriers. There was one other comment that I was going to read. So here it is. A scary finding is the relatively low awareness of AI, despite how common it is currently being used. So that is something that we did find in the report. And really touches on some of the safeguards and those regulations that we've been talking about. Now, we do have another question. So this one I'm actually going to throw to Sophie to answer. So from Dr. Yelena Haynes, she says, I understand emerging technologies have the potential to make a difference, and she's interested in how auDA can make a difference to marginalised communities, so Indigenous communities, those in regional and remote areas, by providing support to emerging technologies and devices and things like that. So
thank you. Thanks for the question. Certainly wasn't expecting one. But in terms of what auDA can do and is doing, auDA, there's probably two things I'd draw attention to. So auDA does have a public benefit program through which we do run community grants. And so we release them at the moment once a year, and they are available to people throughout Australia, and indeed have been granted to some people who work in remote areas, but also in the area of supporting Indigenous Australians. So I'd encourage you to look at those. They come under the auDA Foundation, and perhaps one of the team can drop the link into the chat. And then also we do have our membership program as well. So we have about 4,500 members throughout Australia, also in regional areas. I think the membership team are in Queensland today, but they do try and make their way around the country. And we provide a range of face-to-face workshops and webinars, and also online ones, in particular where we provide support for small businesses in regional areas who may have slightly more trouble accessing those services. And we also work with local business centres and communities and chambers to help get messages out about how people can support themselves online and understand new and emerging technology. So if you're not yet a member, that's just another way you can keep across auDA's activities in this area as well. So thanks for that, Beck. And Beck, I'm conscious of the time, but I did just want to check whether there are any more questions from our audience for our panellists. And if not, I have one last one before we say goodbye today.
We do have one more. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but here we go. So this commenter really liked the point you raised, Johanna, about the need for more positive language in regulatory conversations to promote business certainty. So how do we strike the right balance between consumer and business responsibility when it comes to use and diffusion of tech? The onus of responsibility, if something goes wrong, is always on businesses. And until we don't have the ideal secure by default model, how do we ensure consumers are also kept accountable for mismanagement?
Well, look, I think I probably disagree respectfully with the comment that currently the onus falls on small businesses, because actually, or on business, because actually I think for a lot of the privacy breaches, for a lot of the security breaches, actually the impact is felt by the individuals, and they have very little recourse at the moment that is practical and useful for them to be able to respond. So I think we are in a period of time where there will probably be more pain for businesses, because we're going through a period of adjustment. The question really acknowledged that we're not yet at a period where we have security by default, where we have privacy by default, where we have safety by default. And that really one of the key levers that we have to build that is regulation and saying it is mandatory to have that. And there will be a period of time where businesses who don't have that will go through a period of pain in making sure that their products and services have that. I think it's really important that we have those things in place. And then you can have a conversation about mismanagement by consumers or people, using products in manners that they weren't intended. But actually, our legal system does this all of the time, right? Product safety is rife with conversations about this. The product was designed for fitness for purpose. It was designed for this purpose. Was it fit for that purpose? Was it used for a different purpose? So our legal system has the frameworks to use this. We need to activate that. We need the ACCC to be taking cases. We need, consumer advocates and groups to be taking these types of cases and testing them. And that will then take the choice. And, in that, when I talk about this period of pain, I also think it's really important that businesses see the clarity and the certainty that comes from increased regulation as a competitive advantage. At the moment, businesses that are building safety, security, privacy by design are doing so effectively as a choice, and it costs more for you to build a product that has cybersecurity, privacy, safety. Now, if we regulate that, everybody has to do it. So you're evening the playing field, and actually that's better for businesses in the long run. But I do appreciate this is a challenge, and it's the fact that we've embedded the tech before we've embedded the tech in our life before we've really thought about these issues in terms of public policy and our legal systems.
And I actually just want to build on what Joanna has said, because she's absolutely right. Product safety has those discussions all the time. The discussion on foreseeable use as opposed to unforeseeable use, and what does that mean? And things have always worked out in a way where you, as long as you can foresee particular use, there's accountability to a point. And then of course there's misuse, which is in a different bracket altogether, and frankly a very, very small fraction of the percentage of consumers would be in that within that scope. And in terms of our regulations, I feel like to give businesses certainty, there's actually two parts. I've mentioned the unfair trading prohibition. One of the options is a general prohibition with a blacklist, which calls out particular no-go zones, and that can be adapted over time. And I think those are the kind of things that can help give a business, especially a smaller business, more certainty. The other side is we actually have a really great part in our Australian consumer law, which are called consumer guarantees, and it unequivocally states that products and services need to be fit for purpose, acceptable, free from defects, safe and durable. But there's a huge but. So there's no specific obligations in consumer guarantees that relate to software or tech, and there's actually no civil penalties attached. So there's no pathway at the moment for a regulator to enforce them. So there's those kind of gaps, when they're closed, we will end up having how Joanna is referring to, that even playing field, where businesses aren't doing the safety by default, by choice, but they're doing it because it's mandated, and everyone's on a level playing field for that.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Now, I think, Sophie, you might have run out of time for your final question, but I will throw it back to you.
Thanks so much, Beck. And I think you're right. I'm really conscious of everyone's time today. And while I think we've only scratched the tip of the iceberg here and had a really great discussion, I think we are going to have to draw it to a close. So I apologise for those of us, including me, who'd like to keep chatting. But I did want to say a really big thank you to our expert panellists for their time and their insights today. It was a great discussion, gave us lots of pause for thought. Do we need this technology? Are regulators on the right path? How can we ensure consumer confidence without dampening innovation? Just to name a few. I also want to thank our audience for tuning in today. For those of you who are members, we have a great range of events coming up as well. We are hosting a networking event in WA next week in conjunction with Women in Technology WA at their Tech Plus conference. So if you're in Perth, we look forward to seeing you there. Then we're also in Canberra on the 21st of November, hosting a networking event and panel discussion on harnessing technological disruption. So I'm sure emerging tech will get an airing there as well. And then last but not least, for 2023, we're thrilled to end the year with an end of year networking and event function on the 6th of December in Melbourne. So all of the information regarding those events is on our website. And of course, if you're not a member, you are more than welcome to join. All of the details are on our website, or come along to one of these events and see what it's about. So again, I would just like to thank our panelists for joining us today and everyone else online, and we hope to see you at one of our upcoming webinars or events. Thank you, everyone, and stay tuned till next time. Bye now.